In week 4, we look at negotiable instruments. This week we consider 3 different kinds of negotiable instruments: checks, bills of exchange, and promissory notes. Having trawled various resources for a definition of negotiable instrument, the simplest one that can be found is from Investopedia. Have a look at this definition here. A negotiable instrument is a written order or unconditional promise to pay a fixed sum of money on demand or at a certain time. A negotiable instrument can be transferred from one person to another. That's what makes it negotiable. Once the instrument is transferred, the holder obtains full legal title to the instrument, and therefore the rights arising under it. Note that there are 2 subtly different kinds of documents that this definition contemplates. The first phrase of that definition was, a negotiable instrument is a written order or an unconditional promise to pay. So there is a distinction between written order and an unconditional promise to pay. Checks and bills of exchange are examples of a written order. A check is not a promise. It may seem that implied in giving someone a check is a promise that they will be paid upon presentation or a few days after presentation of that check to a bank. But in fact, what a check really is an order to your bank to pay someone. But rather than you giving the direction to your bank, you give it to the person who wants to be paid, and they give it to their bank. It's a bit like your mother or father writing a note for your teacher explaining why you missed school. The explanation is from your parent, and you take it and present it to your teacher, rather than the parent simply handing it directly to your teacher. In any case, the point I mean to stress is that it is a written direction addressed to your bank to pay a person upon presentation of the check. It's not really an IOU. Very similar to checks are bills of exchange, the other kind of written order. The difference is that rather than directing a bank, in particular, it can be directed to anyone to pay a third party, including a bank. Obviously, the person who is being told to pay some other person, the third party, would have some pre-existing contractual obligation to you to do so. They're not going to pay for no reason just because you told them to. And we then come to the final of the 3 negotiable instruments, the promissory note. This falls under the category of negotiable instrument, but it is not a written order. Rather, it's a promise to pay. It's rather like a loan, but instead of putting the lender's name on the contract and saying you have to pay Ted or Bill back at a certain time, you leave that part blank, with the understanding that whoever happens to be in possession of that loan document at the end of the loan period is the one who should be paid back. And this is what allows the note to be negotiable and exchanged through the economy. Chapters 4, 7, and 8 of your textbook take you through the relevant material for this topic. Chapter 4 explains bills of exchange and promissory notes. The section on promissory notes is fairly brief. A large part of the reading is devoted to checks. Both chapters 7 and 8 explain checks, with 7 forming the introduction and 8 dealing with misappropriated checks. The 2 pieces of legislation that you will need to access from time to time are the Bills of Exchange Act 1909 and the Checks Act 1986. Both of these acts are Commonwealth Acts. Promissory notes are regulated in Part 4 of the Bills of Exchange Act. Being Commonwealth Acts, they can be found on common law, but the easier thing to do is to simply type it into Google and to find it through OSLI, which will give you the Act, the sections, and the hyperlink for each section.